everybody. I'm a creator of Elixircards and I love games. My name is Tetiana Dushenkivska, as I already mentioned, and today I would like to share with you the journey of building a quiz for the conferences. So the goal is to build a fun, interactive quiz. The problem is that I'm a full-time mom and I have very limited time for programming. Maybe 2 hours a day if I'm really lucky. But the idea of building a quiz is very appealing. If I only manage to plan it right, I should be able to achieve what I want. Okay, so where would I start? Following Agile methodologies, after understanding what problem customer trying to solve, the next step is to deliver the smallest thing you can think of that will get the customer testing things and giving us feedback. Some might call it an MVP, minimum viable product. But what is MVP? If we rephrase MVP as earliest testable product, it's easier to understand what we are aiming for. It is the first release that customers can actually do something with. Might not solve their problem, but it generates at least some kind of feedback. We make it very clear that learning is the main purpose of this release, and that any actual customer value will be just a bonus at this stage. Using that approach, we decided that the smallest thing we can deliver is a form where people presented with the questions about the beam, and first 10 fill in the form will get the prize. The key was that we will have something in place in the time given, and it will be available online. So we would use Phoenix to generate the form, and we may as well start using LiveView as we are planning to end up with that anyways. We would deploy to DigitalOcean using Docker and set up a subdomain for quiz. We can save the score to database, but to access the data, we would need to build authorization so customer can see the scores. But we don't have time to build authorization, so we decided to save results to Google Sheet and share it with the customer, which turned out to be a pretty good idea. The customer wasn't too impressed with our early release. In fact, when we described it, we thought that it's not that different to Google Form, which already out there and have many more features than our first quiz would. The reason our earliest testable product looked not impressive is because we were worried about being against the time, and we didn't want to promise more than we can achieve. So, same as preparing for the party, it's important to get food ready when guests are hungry. Same as delivering a lot of food, but when guests are all gone, would not make guests believe that it was a great food. Same doing a big release after one time of development is risking to leave customer not happy. So the key is to develop a product iteratively and incrementally. Or in other words, in bite sizes. Or as we are talking about programming here, should I say bite sizes? In our release, our first bite was looking like this. We already have a way to create content via our editor, so we could create a mapping and point to the questions from the specific deck. Now the question was, how do we set up specific quiz to point to a specific deck? By creating a mapping of quiz URL to the specific deck ID. So then /test, the parameter would point to the cards from the deck with ID 1. All we need to do is to accept the conference name as a parameter and pass it to our LiveView. And when we get to mount function, we would fetch the deck containing the cards. So now we have our questions. Once we got that, we were ready to create some kind of experience of the quiz. Just having questions doesn't seem to be enough. It's not a complete feature. Delivering iteratively and incrementally is good, but what's delivered should be complete. Again, drawing an analogy from preparing for the party, would your mom be happy if at the party all she gets is boiled potatoes and gherkins out of the Olivier salad? It's like, yeah, mom, it's okay. The rest is coming. Just not this party, tomorrow. So to complete our feature on the quiz, we had to set up an explanation around how this quiz works. We created a welcome page which explains what this quiz is about, and at the end, we wanted to thank people for trying it out. Now, if we set up a quiz and the customer doesn't like the text on the first page or the last, would we need to redeploy? And thinking ahead, we thought that we'll make it easier for ourselves if we allow passing HTML for messages which we want to render during the quiz, and then render it as HTML. Next on this feature was adding the ability to provide the answer to the question. And as it's a live view, it was easy to render one card at a time with input field, save the answer in the state of the live view, and submit to Google Sheet at the end. Another good thing is that we already have figured formatting of the cards in our editor, so we just copied that. If we would have run out of time, we could have shared this version, but we still had some time left and we wanted to do better. And we wanted to share with the customer a little bit more gamified version. So mobile is going into this first release, adding some interactivity seemed like a good idea. So we added score, which would increase if the answer is correct. We have correct answers stored already in our system, so it was a case of comparing user input with the correct answer. The ability to compare the answer initially was not working very well. Those two strings wouldn't match. As it's a player input, it would have been good not to care. Sorry, those two strings wouldn't match. So as it's a player input, it wouldn't have if we wouldn't need to care about the blank spaces at the beginning and at the end of the string, but in the middle. So we decided that if we downcase and trim that user input before comparing, that would work much better. Then we discovered that only having one chance to get it right was annoying. So we decided to allow 3 attempts to get it right. That was better, but if you don't know the answer, it was unclear what to do. So we added a skip button. Then we discovered that not knowing how many questions we have to answer is disheartening. So we showed the number of cards answered and total number of cards. And at this stage, we were running out of time. So we decided to share what we have with the customer so we get some feedback and have a few days to improve. The absence of a feedback loop is risky and not agile. The feedback we got, not knowing the answer after 3 attempts is frustrating. So then we showed the correct answer. Comparing 2 strings for the answer, not the best. Maybe comparing ASTs would be better. Okay, so we've added that. When comparing AST, it's important to remember not to evaluate the code when comparing the code. Evaluating user input on our server wouldn't be a good idea. By the way, can you see the problem with this solution? We don't need to downcase here because when player submits downcased hello to string capitalize question, it shouldn't be accepted as a correct answer. Also, trimming is not needed as when string converted to AST, it's been trimmed. But the fix for those would come later in later versions. And at this point, we didn't discover that yet. However, what we did discover is that if you reload the page, the quiz would jump at the beginning of it. And as we were showing the answer, players could go through the quiz, get all of the answers, reload, go again, get the highest score. But by that point, we ran out of time, so we had to release what we had with a bug to the users. So as for Agile practice, it's good to remember that at first release stage, the customer is unlikely to be happy with the release. Our main goal at this point is just to learn. The good thing is that we clearly explained that first version is going to be rough, so delivering a little bit more than initially planned was quite a positive thing. Our customer was actually quite happy because they thought they're going to get a Google form, but they got somewhat playable quiz. Yes, it was not that intuitive, not that fun yet, but it was better than nothing. We told our customer that it's just the beginning, and while we are aiming to build an awesome, fun, interactive quiz, meanwhile, we can try this first iteration and gather some feedback. think big, but deliver in small, functionally viable increments. And I just walked you through how we get to our first release using Agile. We used that version at CodeBeam in May. Oh, yes. And the day before the conference, I really wanted to get a few things in. And, I was working too late. I got tired, got a bit of a code fatigue, and suddenly quiz stopped working at all. The fun would go crazy on my laptop, and I was wondering what's going on. Maybe it's some system update, but it's a bit unusual for Mac to go that crazy. Maybe I'm running dialyzer. That must be it. No, it wasn't. The fun only starts going crazy when I run the quiz with the IX-S mix Phoenix server, so run it locally. And the problem is that I've written that recursive call, sneaky one. So beware of those recursive sneaky calls. So we ran the quiz and got some feedback. And it's mostly on the content and not on the quiz itself. So it was hard to action. And we decided to make assumptions and improve in the way we think. The key is that we get to test our assumptions quite soon. The first thing which was important to me was to set up a start and the end time of the quiz, so I don't have to wake up earlier to enable it. Another thing I wanted to improve is to refactor a little bit this first rough version. The issue was the file containing LiveView code got really long, which made it hard to read, change, add new features to. Having all the logic inside the LiveView made it hard to test. So we didn't test, but that didn't give us confidence, and we didn't know whether things are still working after a little change. Some may say that I should have been TDD in it. But the problem is that I didn't know exactly how to approach it and exactly what I'm building. So writing tests first slowed me right down, as I was trying to think about data types and API before I even know what I'm writing. And what I was writing, that functionality was changing a lot during the first phase. TDD, when you know the domain or expectation is clear, is definitely much easier. Anyways, missing tests and readability issues were a problem. How would you solve those? We extracted the game state changes into its own file. The goal is to keep that state pure and pass dependencies to it, so all impure stuff lives within the live process, and game changes are pure and easy to test. That helped a bit, but we thought we can do a little bit better. Extracting data into structs seems like a good idea. Here is an example of how using structs can make code simpler. To display which card you are on now, we kept card index in the game state. Then we had to test to verify that if card answered correctly, then game moves to the next card and card index is updated. Then we moved card index to card struct and set the index at the beginning of the game in a setup cards function. So here we only needed to set it up once, and we don't have to manage it within the game state anymore. We don't want that index to be persisted in a database as it quiz specific. So we set it up as a virtual field on a card schema. The benefit is that all fields to do with the card are within the card, so it's easy to read the code. There is another benefit. As we only set up data once, we don't need a test on update because we tested the init, and that gives us confidence that things work. And there is no more card index, which we need to manage within the game. So moving towards using structs to manage data helped with readability and confidence. Another problem with readability was with the organization of templates. The conf live template got really long and hard to read and manage, so extracting into a template for each game state made it easier to read. In our live view, we ran the index HTML template, which then renders the template for the given state. And each template for each state is basically different screen of the quiz. And they kind of made sense. And with that refactoring, we used our quiz at Elixircards. And again, we didn't get much feedback from players. At this point, we realized that if we have a problem with the quiz, then people tell us about it during the conference. If we don't, then we don't hear much from them. So we decided to make more assumptions and test them. Our idea was to make quiz more competitive, show the high scoreboard, which is time-based. The quicker you answered questions, the higher up the board you are. That way, you can keep trying until you're happy with your result. And what if you don't know the answer? Having a way to provide the hints, also time-based, would be nice. So every 20 seconds, give a hint if correct answer hasn't arrived. So I've added a timer which would record how long it takes to answer a card, removed number of attempts, removed the submit button, and used on change event instead of the Phoenix submit, and moved to implementing hints. How would the hints look like? I thought that it would be awesome to use string Maya difference to highlight correct parts of the answer green and incorrect red. The problem is that I couldn't figure out quickly how to make it work for a slightly longer input. For example, this one. Here I would like to highlight hello you and have some indication that there is a section missing at the beginning. And I couldn't figure out quickly how to solve that. I was a bit against at the time, so I thought that, okay, I'm gonna park the Myers difference for now, come back to that later, and I'm gonna focus on easier hints. For example, to tell whether the answer is correct data type. So if someone passed an integer, but the answer is a string, then that would be a good hint. Then what is the way to get a type out of the input? One way, I thought, is to parse the string and try convert it to integer. You convert it to integer. And then you keep going until you converted it to a known data type. Or you tried everything and can't convert it because it's invalid data type. So let's walk through this. In this example, we can get first element of the tuple, and it's going to be our answer, integer 34. If we can't parse the input, we get error. Okay, so then parsing float to integer returns a tuple where first element is 34 and second is a decimal part. To determine the type, I would have to pattern match on a tuple, having first element and second being an empty string. Then I can say that the input is an integer, right? And I can now say that the last example is a float. Well, how about this? This is not float. So now to determine whether the input is a float, I have to check that in the second element of the tuple, the value after dot is an integer. Pattern match on second element and check. Yeah, so check that it's an integer. Well, that seemed like a lot of work to just find out one type, whether it's an integer, and obviously there are many more types, and I can't do this partially. These hints on types, because I may have cards which are of any type. So I started to look around for another way, and I can only get the values out of the string if I could use the guard clauses, if I get the values. So I could say is integer is boolean, and that would tell me whether it's that type or not. Well, you can get the value from AST. So I turn the input to AST, then check that what type it is using the guard clauses, and that worked with basic data types. And how about a tuple or a map or mix command? That's also doable with a bit of pattern matching. And what if input in AST is unknown type, which we didn't cover in our case clauses? Then we add the catch-all cases to say it's the surprise. And what if the input is half typed? So running this via our function would raise a syntax error. That would crash my quiz. And good old supervision tree would pick that up and reload the quiz. So user gets to start all over again. That's not great. Could this be fixed? Of course. At least this works. With the questions I've created, that type of hints seem to work. Now, at this point, I realized that I've made a mistake of forgetting to focus on small incremental deliveries. So now I didn't have a score calculated anymore, quiz didn't have its quizness, and I realized that I'm running out of time. But I still have lots of features to do before this version is complete, and I can't have this thing in the middle. It's not playable anymore. Also, not only I made a mistake building wrong thing, but also I don't know when I had the latest working version. I would have to go through Git to find that commit, but it's a project in the spare time, so I can't promise you that all commit messages are up to a high standard. Anyways, here I thought that keeping changelog and tagging every playable version, even for a toy project, so would have been a really good idea. Oh well, at this point I thought I have to abandon all the hints varieties and just have one on type as it's working now, and then give the answer away after 20 seconds. And make it work with the score. So give the hint after 20 seconds, give the answer after 40 seconds, and that would have its quizness again. And now I had to focus on scores and to make it playable again. To calculate the score, we were timing how long the quiz took to save, how long the quiz would take, and we would save that result to the database. Then we made it live, as it's a live view after all. First thing was to let player know that the scoreboard is live and being updated by adding a countdown to show when quiz finishes. Plus, on every tick, fetch latest score. But was that a good idea to fetch all high scores every second for all active players? Can that load on database be reduced? Well, why not send a new high score for all players when there is a new score added? How would we do that? Using PubSub. So on mount, we would subscribe to the topic. Then when quiz finishes and player is happy to submit his score to the database, and if that's successful, we broadcast to all players newly added score for that topic with the message. Once new score received, the high scoreboard results could update it without touching the database again. So here we'll just receive that message and then we add it to our high scores and then we sort it by ascending and that's it. That's done. And at this point, we were back at having a playable quiz. And this time, we didn't wait for feedback we were struggling to action on. So we decided to have a test group of our friends in Elixir community beyond. That time, the feedback we received was much better. For example, the idea that it would be nice to disable the hints was good, and that hints actually doesn't work for all type of questions. For example, for a question when Erlang was open source, the hint it's an integer didn't actually help too much. Well, we noted that. And I think at that point we kind of reached our earliest usable product milestone. Earliest usable product is the first release that early adopters will actually use willingly. It is far from done and it might not be very likable, but it does put your customers in a better position than before. So we use that at ElixirConf and we ask for feedback again. We got people ticking boxes like, oh, we like and we love it. So we must be on the right track. And here we realized that the next quiz is for Code Beam conference, and it would be nice to have cards which are from various languages on the Beam, and the input from the player wouldn't parse unless it's an Elixir, so we can't provide hints anymore. So to solve that, I've cheated a little bit. Thinking outside the box, I chopped the correct answer in half. First half was hint number 1, second half was hint number 2. Very easy. And it works for any input, regardless of the language. And at this point, our customers was quite happy and appreciating improvements. The interesting thing here is that the original request and what we build is different, but it solves the problem of providing a bit of interactivity for conference attendees. Customer problem is solved, but not quite how customer thought in the first place. And with customer being happy, we rolled out our quiz at CodeBeam. And we get a good feedback. And then we thought, what can we improve next? Setting up logo for the conference is painful and needs improvement. So we don't have a way to upload images to our platform. Should we invest our time in setting up image upload API and setting up S3 or some other way? Is there a quicker way to achieve that? And we found a site which will host limited amount of images for free. And it also provides us with the link to the image, which we can embed in our image tag. And that worked for us, at least it works for now, as we have only few images and we don't really need to keep them. So we saved that this link to the image, and then we used it in our HTML. And with that, we released a new version. Again, not much feedback on improvements, but most people love and like our quiz. Next set of assumptions. Color the cards for different languages differently and improve hints because they're still not the best. Hints are not required and style is not required. And it would be nice to have flexibility on those optional fields. We come up with the idea of having a meta field which can contain optional data. That way, we don't have to change the database structure every time we change that optional field or fields. If we want to remove that field or add the new field. So all we need is one new field in database called meta. And we thought that we would have it as a map. We could have it as a JSON, but that would allow any data within it. And we want to have it a bit of control of which fields are allowed and what type they are. And that's why we added meta as a embed, so we can specify fields and types in embedded schema. And here we could also add validations if we want. And we deployed those changes, set up hints, add some styles on production. And while we were doing that, we realized that keeping a class in our CSS for the language works much better than specifying it in the style field of meta tag, because the style just had way too much in it and it just didn't work. But we already had this data in production. So would it be easy to change? It was easy to change. And there was no issues whatsoever. There was no change required to the database. So we changed the style to a class, specified the style in our CSS, told our HTML to use that, and bam, it was working like a charm. We had nice hints and card styles for Code Mesh conference. The feedback we get from that conference is that it's not working on iPhone or iPad. So I had here a dilemma whether I'm preparing this talk or fixing that, and I decided to do this talk. So it's still not working, and I'll be tackling this issue after this talk. And I would say that after solving the usability on various devices issue, we would be heading towards earliest lovable product. It's first release that customers will love, tell their friends about, and maybe we'll be willing to pay for it. Well, there is still what's to improve, but we've reached the point where we have a truly marketable product. And we've set up our latest version specifically for this meetup conference for Elixir Club. If you haven't tried it yet, you still have a little bit of time to do it. It doesn't take that long. We even set up a little prize, which you might have heard about it, to keep it all real. It has to be a proper competition. It's not a big prize because we're a little company, but a deck of physical cards and some goodies would be there for you. And the winner would be announced, I think, after networking. We did have a time set up on that. And yes, of course, a good quality feedback on this quiz would be very much appreciated. And with that, let's summarize the lessons learned by us and shared with you just now. If you remember those steps, and then you'll guarantee to have a happy customer. First, learn about your customer. Then identify what problem customer trying to solve. Then release earliest testable product. Then receive a feedback. And then make small improvements. And repeat the last two until you reach your lovable product. And that's everything I wanted to share with you today. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for your time.